everybody, welcome to the Leicester Lives podcast in association with our new sponsor, Igloo Staffing Solutions. There'll be a lot more between the collaboration between our podcast and this brand coming up in future episodes. Usual request, if you like what you hear and if you like what you see, please do hit that subscribe button. It really does make a difference to the future of this podcast. Now, I always introduce my guests by saying they've had an interesting Leicester life. I'm going to introduce this one slightly differently. I'm going to say this person's had a pretty crazy Leicester life. Chantelle Marquez, thanks very much for coming into the studio, Chantelle, and being a guest on our podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Absolute pleasure. Now, I always like to roll it all the way back to the start and talk about growing up, early experiences. So let's take it back to the beginning. Tell me about how you grew up.
Okay, so I was born in the Philippines. My dad's English, my mum is Filipino, and we moved over to England when I was a baby. The area that my mum came from and where I was born is very famous for its adult industry, the red light district, strip clubs and all of that. And that was quite present in my mum's side of the family through extended family members and stuff. And then we moved to Essex. My mum and dad had quite a toxic relationship. It was quite turbulent at home. And they broke up. My mum moved to Leicester. And by the time I was 12, things at home got really bad. I had serious behaviour problems and I went into care.
Okay, so let's just roll that back a little bit, Chantelle. You've moved from the Philippines. You've come over to Essex initially.
Yeah.
Early school years, fairly sort of relaxed?
Yeah. I was quite a good kid in primary school. It wasn't till secondary school that I started to go off the rails.
And when you say you went off the rails, give me an example.
I was on the front of a Essex newspaper for bringing vodka on a school trip to court. And I just got expelled from almost every school I went to.
To court?
Yeah. Do you remember those? Sometimes they used to send kids on courses called like Prison No Way. That's what it was called, Prison No Way, to put kids off going to prison. I was put on that, and then I got the kids drunk on the school trip, which looking back is very silly and dumb, but at the time it was funny.
And it made the newspaper?
Yeah, which is wild because I'm sure there was a lot worse crimes going on.
Exactly. So you end up in care, and this is presumably as a result of behavioural issues at school, behavioural issues at home, which you predominantly sort of put down to maybe a turbulent family environment?
Yeah, I think I experienced quite a bit of trauma growing up. I did experience sexual abuse at 6 years old. It was later found out that I've got bipolar. That's only just been diagnosed, and for the first time in my life, I've got balanced moods and my life's in control, it just reflects a lot of why I had behaviour problems.
And we were talking about this earlier, of course, because I was making the point that should a child be behaving in the way that you were now at 12 years old, society would look upon it much differently. They'd be looking at the reasons for that behaviour, whereas when you were 12 years old, it was very much just a reactive approach. She's trouble, we're going to get rid of her, and you end up in the care system as a consequence.
Yeah.
So you get put into care. Tell me about the first night in care and how you actually felt in that environment.
It was weird because I felt a lot of guilt. What happened for me to go into care, I won't go into too much detail, but I basically turned myself into the police because things were bad at home. And I got straight away put in care. And I remember being in this house where they put kids, and I was just like, what on earth is going on? It was a mixture of emotions. I was excited, I was confused, I felt guilty for getting my family members in trouble.
And what sort of variety of other kids did you have in that particular environment? Because I suppose a lot of children come into care for very different reasons. So you've come in because of a combination of the behavioural issues and the problems at home, but what about What about your sort of peer group there, the other people who are in care?
Well, the kids that I was in care with, we were all crazy. So growing up, I was around a lot of madness, and that's normal to me. So as I went into my 20s, my friends were also crazy, and that's just what I was drawn to. I was always drawn to people that had turbulent backgrounds.
And where was the care home that you went to?
I went to loads of different foster families, moved around, and then I got put in a kids' home as a last resort. And that's when my life turned around, because they really knew how to nurture a naughty kid.
And I believe you showed a bit of talent for music at that particular time.
Yeah, so I was in a detention at school, and they were holding auditions for the school play. And I was like, can I have a go? So I got up and sung, and everyone seemed a bit like shocked that this really crazy, naughty kid could actually sing. And after that, everything changed. My whole life changed. I was getting sent to auditions across the country for performing arts schools. And then I become hyper fixated on learning music, dance, acting, and I got my grades. I changed as a kid. I completely changed when I turned to music.
And something I just wanted to touch upon, because obviously we're here today to talk about your story, but there would be a lot of other stories of other children that were in care at that particular time. And I suppose being noticed for your musical talent was your gateway out of that particular environment. But there's an awful lot of children in the care system who literally are just dumped out of the system at 16 years old. And I'm sure you know a lot of previous children who are now adults who are suffering as a result.
It's really sad. Some of the people I was in care with, they were just left. I mean, I was sort of left to my own devices at 16, but some of the situations they're in now, it's really sad to see, because they just had no guidance whatsoever. Like, how do you navigate normal life when you've not had anyone telling you how to do that?
Absolutely. I think one thing in this country which is seriously lacking for all children is life skills generally. You know, that when you do come to fend by yourself, that you should be equipped with life skills to push you forward as an adult, as opposed to sometimes learning things which are completely irrelevant, like middle-age history and all the rest of it. So we'll come on to that on a different occasion.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're noticed for your musical talent. You go to this School of Performing Arts.
Yeah.
What happens?
Well, that school was very full on. It was amazing. I learnt so much about self-discipline there. I'd gone from being a really naughty kid to suddenly having to do ballet, 9 till 6 every day, Monday to Friday, training hardcore. It was like being in the military or something. And I loved it for the first year. I got a lot of recognition and opportunities. But by the second year, I think the pressure really got to me, and mental health started to kick in. I got hospitalised for an overdose, and then I dropped out, started looking for nightlife and stuff by the time I turned 18.
And was this the pressure of, I suppose, a combination of what you've been through, what you're currently going through, and I suppose just the immaturity of being that particular age as well?
Yeah, all of those things. I think one thing that was really hard for me was when it came to the performances, everyone's parents would be there. And that really got to me when I was younger, that like I never had anyone coming to watch me. Actually, some of my teachers from school came to watch.
And when you dropped out of that particular course, would you say you were relieved, or were you disappointed in yourself?
Relieved, because I wasn't really a musical theatre person. I liked music, so I ended up doing a songwriting course instead, and that suited me so much more.
Okay, so you leave the School of Performing Arts, so what happens next? Presumably you wake up the next morning and the diary's blank, so what happens?
So I start partying in Nottingham, getting involved in that scene, bands, rock and roll, drugs, you know, all that fun stuff. And I decided, how can I make a living doing this? So I started a club night when I was 19, and that would allow me to live, but also party. And then I got into DJing, and all of that whilst at college doing songwriting. It was all feeding into each other.
Sure.
And do you know what? For the first time in my life, I kind of felt like a somebody. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, it was like kind of giving me validation for a little bit, and it felt good.
And that's something, to be honest, at 19 years old, takes a lot of confidence to be promoting club nights, to be DJing. It sounds easy if you just sort of say it off the top of your head, but it does take a lot of confidence.
Yeah, at the start, it was dead, my club nights, and I used to go out on the streets and be like, guys, come to this is the best club night you've ever been to. And then over time, I built a brand around it, and that's where I really got into my entrepreneurial side and marketing, branding, and yeah.
So why did you not continue with the club nights, and why did you not continue with the DJing? Because obviously a lot of people make careers. One of our previous podcasts was all about somebody making a career out of club nights and DJing. Why did you not make that into a career? Why did you look for other avenues?
I went to uni, and I had this idea that I wanted to be a corporate businesswoman. But then, I went to uni in London for a year. There's a running theme of me dropping out of courses. But then my mum, she lost her house, and I'm the eldest of 5 siblings, and watching them struggle to eat and stuff really got to me. That was the hardest thing I've ever experienced through all the trauma and everything.
I can imagine. So your mum presumably is on her own.
Yeah.
She loses the house presumably because of financial pressures of trying to bring up a relatively large family on what I would imagine to be a sort of fixed budget.
Yeah.
What happens to her and the siblings that you have? You're in London, obviously, but what happens to them? Because losing a home is a huge trauma, like you said.
Yeah, they got evicted and put into housing, but there was nothing in the house. Like, they were sleeping on the floor, and I had friends coming and donating plates and stuff. It was horrific to see. My little brothers, I feel like I'm their mum sometimes, and I felt so helpless. So that was a pivotal point for me, wanting to really do well in life, to be fair.
So presumably at this time, you need money.
Yeah.
And this is when you start to look at other avenues.
Yeah.
So tell us about these other avenues.
Yeah, so I need money, and someone I was close to at the time was a stripper. And I'm finding out that, stripping is pretty decent money, So I went on a night out and watched her do her thing. And then by midnight, I was sort of dancing on people's laps for money. But the fast cash of it was so attractive to me at the time, considering the situation I was in.
So this friend of yours, had she been involved in the industry for a while? No,
not really. I have got family members that were involved in that industry as well. So, yeah.
So you begin stripping. Obviously, you have the mental health issues. How does the stripping impact upon your state of mental health?
It's weird because in one way it really suits it, because in a normal job you can't take a day off for having an episode, but in stripping you don't have to go to work if you're mentally ill that day. But on the other hand, all the alcohol, late nights, they really negatively impact bad mental health.
And when you say you started stripping at a club, I think everybody knows there's different types of strip joints that exist, from some sort of rough and ready East End pub where they're just passing around a pint glass and people are sort of putting money into like very, very upmarket establishments. What type of establishment were you dancing in initially? Initially,
it was a very small sort of rundown club.
In Leicester?
Yeah, I don't want to say like where it was because I do have a lot of love for that first club, but I don't want to talk bad about them.
No, that's fine.
But yeah, Eventually, I worked my way up to the top clubs, which at the time was like my dream in life. I want to work at the top clubs in London. And eventually I did go on and do that.
So how do you work your way up to the top clubs? Because with most careers, you can see there's a ladder to climb and people are pretty established in the way that ladder works. But I would imagine most people viewing this podcast would not really understand how you would go up the ladder in the stripping industry. So just take us through it. You're at this small, relatively, as you said, rundown club, which you have a lot of love for, which is absolutely fine. But you're there. How do you take the next step? Do you get noticed by people? Do people talk to each other? What happens?
So before my shifts, I would always train on the pole, teach myself how to be a good pole dancer. And then I learned like a lot about sales because it's competitive in London. So you have to be able to sell, hundreds of £300 dance. You can't just do that by being like, do you want to go for a dance? It doesn't really work like that. And you've got to be able to entertain someone for an hour if they're booking you for an hour.
And I'm not looking today for you to analyse or make judgments on the type of people that come to those particular establishments, but just tell us about the wide range of probably individuals that you see, because again, I think people would maybe have a stereotypical image of the punter who goes to the strip club, but I'm sure the perception and reality are probably two different things.
Yeah, I mean, you get lads on nights out, you get footballers, you do get your seedy sort of men, but a lot of the time it's lonely people, and I could really resonate with that from my childhood. So I never really judged any of the men that come in, and throughout my time in the adult industry, I had some really sincere moments with people because I was going through the same thing myself.
Well, people are people at the end of the day, aren't they? Everybody has a backstory.
Yeah.
And that would include every single person who walks into that particular club. What about safety at that particular time? Because I think that's the other thing that a lot of people would think about, the safety of the girls who are working there. Because if you're pole dancing in pretty much next to nothing in a predominantly male-dominated environment, there's obviously got to be safety concerns.
Yeah, the safety's usually pretty good because you're being monitored in dances all the time. But there are occasions where guys cross the line. So as a woman, you've got to be someone that has a backbone. You've got to be able to handle yourself in them situations. And the thing you've got to be more cautious of is the girls around you, because they'll rob you.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's savage. I'm more aware of what the girls are up to than what the men are up to.
Interesting. So, not looking for exact figures, but when you're working in that first club, what sort of money are you earning then, would you say? Well,
when I started, I wasn't on that much because I wasn't very good at it. But then as you get better, it varies so much. You could go home making £300 a night. Some nights you could make £2,000 in a night. I've known people to come home with 10 grand in a night. Some nights you could be going home with minus because you have to pay the house fee.
How much was the house fee?
It depends what club. The better the club, the more expensive the house fee.
Sure. So you have to work to get yourself to zero, and then everything else after a certain point is therefore profit.
Yeah.
And is it mainly cash or credit card, or a combination?
Now it's a lot of card. Yeah. People don't really carry cash anymore.
So here's a question. What does the transaction say on the bank statement? Because I'm sure a lot of people don't want X strip club on their Barclaycard statement. So
Yeah.
what does it say? Just some sort of
It
random
normally
company?
says a pub.
Does it?
Yeah. Like a random name.
Yeah. That wasn't a question for me. That was just...
Are you sure?
So you're working at that first club. What happens now? What happens to go to the next level? Because presumably you start to become well established. As you said, you're getting better at your craft. But then you move on, presumably, to the next level. What is the next level?
Well, the next level is the top clubs, Rood in Liverpool, Platinum Lace in London. And that's where, people will come and spend 10,000 in a night. But it's very competitive.
So you've lost the lads' night out at this particular time, I would assume.
You do get them, but the lads' nights out, they'll spend more in London. Yeah.
And like you said, maybe a lot of lonely people with plenty of cash who will literally just spend it on the girls there. Are the girls similar in the big clubs as they are to the small clubs? Because you said about you've got to watch your back with the other girls in the small clubs. Is it a little bit more chilled at the bigger clubs?
It's a lot safer in the bigger clubs. It's a lot more monitored, and they don't tolerate bullshit from the girls in the big clubs.
And what sort of background do the girls come from?
This is an interesting one because I learnt a statistic recently that I think it's 90% of girls in the sex industry have been sexually assaulted at some point in their lives or will go on to in the industry. But that's not the case with everyone. But from my experience of the girls that I've met, they've come from some sort of adversity, an ability to do whatever it takes to put food on their families.
Sure. I think there's a similar statistic as well about pornography, how something like 90% of pornography that you see is abuse in itself, and then 95% of people arrive there through abusive experiences in their life. So those stats would sort of pretty much back up what you've just said about your particular element of the industry.
Yeah.
So you're working at the big clubs. How are you feeling in yourself? Because, like you said, you have the mental health issues, you've got bipolar, this doesn't disappear. You're working in a competitive, pressurised environment. How is your mental health?
Well, at times it was good, at times it was bad. I think the real issue is, so COVID, when COVID happened, all the clubs closed down. And then all the girls in them clubs were sort of forced to look at other ways of making money.
Sure.
I knew people that went into, like girls that went into drug dealing, going into the harder side of the sex industry.
Just touch upon drugs there. Sorry to interrupt, Chantelle.
Yeah.
With drugs, is there a big drug culture within the girls in the stripping industry? Because I would imagine to be performing for hours on end in a pressurised environment, a lot of people might look for something, some sort of artificial stimulant, to get them through a shift. I saw a couple of your YouTube videos where, there's a lot of shots being drunk and things like this. So
Yeah.
Is it a pretty sort of heavy lifestyle?
Oh, yeah. In the smaller clubs, you see a lot of drugs. In the bigger clubs, the girls don't often drink because they're really professional about it. But I definitely used to love a drink.
And did that help your performance, or was it just sort of levelling out your mental health, would you say?
It was a confidence thing. Like, I think deep down I'm a bit of a introvert, but I present very confident. So booze helped me a lot.
Sure. So we're leading up to the COVID situation. You've gone from the small club to the big club. You're feeling okay in yourself. Presumably you're enjoying the work, otherwise you wouldn't do it. Do you feel in any way degraded by the work that you're doing?
Oh, yeah. At times, it's hard because you tell yourself a narrative to get through it sometimes. But then when I've been in therapy sessions, there have been times where I look back and I think, definitely in other sides of the industry, not so much in the dancing, and depending on the club and the customer. I was very picky about which customers I had.
And the customers themselves, like you said, they come from a variety of backgrounds. Without wanting to sound obvious, do some of them want more than just the dance that you're going to provide?
Yeah, always.
And how do you handle that situation?
You just tell them no.
And does that put you in any sort of dangerous situation at times?
Sometimes I think I've had such a crazy life that I don't know what dangerous is. So when people ask me them questions, I'm a little bit like, I don't know.
Maybe not the best perception or awareness of danger.
Yeah, I'm probably, yeah, that's it.
So you're okay in what you're doing. You're enjoying the work. you might feel, like you said, slightly degraded, but you put that into a compartment in your brain somewhere, so it's not really troubling you at that particular time. But like you said, COVID happens, and COVID happens pretty quickly, in fairness, doesn't it? You know, whatever our views about what happened and all the rest of it, it happened. It is something that did happen in history. We've gone from presumably the rumours in February, the shutdown in March, and literally, as you said, the clubs just close overnight. Where are you financially at this particular time? Because the one thing I think about potentially your industry is it's fast money. And I think when people get fast money, they don't appreciate money. When people maybe go to work on a building site and they have X amount of money, they think more about the money there, you know. But as you said, if you could walk out with literally thousands of pounds for a weekend's work, easy come, easy go.
Well, when COVID happened, I hadn't been dancing long. I didn't have much money when COVID happened, and I was living in an Airbnb. So I had nowhere to go, so I had to think quick. So I moved in with a customer. And that was interesting.
So this customer, had you known them long?
No.
How did you come to be living with them?
We were just like, we'd been on a few dates since meeting in the club, and COVID happened, and I was like, can I come stay with you?
And was this someone of a similar age to yourself?
He was actually 19. That's what I mean, you get all ages in strip clubs.
But this didn't work out?
No, unfortunately.
And fairly quickly, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people struggled in COVID, the fact that there were little places to go and a lot of time that people spent with each other, you know, so I would imagine that would be testing in that particular environment. So what happens now? Because you can't just exist on zero money. And I suppose when you've been working in the adult industry like you have, it's not like Rishi Sunak's furlough scheme kicks in. No. That. You're pretty much high and dry. So what do you do?
I stayed there until things started to open again. And then I just thought, right, what am I going to do? I need to go find some men that I can, like, I don't know. I looked at, like, sugar daddy websites.
And just explain for our viewers what a sugar daddy actually is.
So it's where you have an arrangement where you're essentially paid to be someone's girlfriend with no strings attached, and they support your life financially.
So you go onto these websites, carry on.
Go onto these websites, and then I go down to London and start making friends down there, the wrong crowd. What comes with the sugar baby world, sugar daddy, sugar baby world, is also the world of crime. Okay.
So on these sugar daddy websites, this is presumably men looking for women for this girlfriend experience.
Yeah.
Is there a certain type of man who's looking for girls, or is it, again, a wide range of people?
A wide range of people. Obviously, you do get your married men in the whole industry. And that's a bit like, I would try and put that to the back of my mind. I didn't want to know. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. And did you get into an arrangement, in a sort of sugar daddy arrangement, or did that just sort of peter out?
Yeah, I got into loads. And I survived off it. But at the time of me going down to London to try and figure out a way, there was a secret strip club open. And it was advertised as a strip club. And I went and did an interview down there, and he was like, gave me a nice meal. It was like, yeah, come work. And he was so charming and lovely. And then that soon became apparent that it wasn't a strip club.
Okay. So it was a...
It was... I don't know. They were soliciting girls.
Yeah. So I was thinking, Chantelle, that if you're in a financial relationship where there's a sugar daddy and yourself, if I'm in a regular relationship, you're in a regular relationship where you meet somebody and it doesn't work out, or there's abuse within that relationship, you can just walk away. But if you're in a relationship where it's financially controlled, it must be more difficult, surely, just to walk away from a situation like that.
Yeah, I was in quite a controlling relationship within that world. I mean, I got into a lot of situations like that. And I think as a young girl, you feel like you're in control, but a 50-year-old man knows a lot more about life than what a 21, 22-year-old girl does. And when a young girl sees money and handbags and holidays or whatever, they'll just be like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want.
That's what I was thinking, because, as we said, fast money comes with a lack of respect for money, and possibly, would you say, a lack of respect for yourself?
Yeah, there were times where I sold my soul. And I take accountability for those actions. You know, you make them decisions, you have to suffer for it mentally. For a year coming out of the dark side of that world, I was seeing men attack me in my sleep. I had to spend a lot of money on therapy after coming out of that world.
And I'll say that sometimes when you, and not yourself I'm talking about, but I'm just talking generally, if you think of the eyes as the window to the soul, and you look at some people who've been involved in the adult industries, their eyes do look slightly dead. It's almost like what they've been involved in robs their soul of happiness, love, positive energy. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really heartbreaking. I remember during COVID, I was in a hotel and I saw a girl opposite the corridor who was sort of doing whatever she needed to do to survive. And she had a dead stare behind her eyes. And she didn't look like someone that was from that industry. She's someone that had clearly, COVID had struck.
Yeah.
And she had to figure it out.
Yeah. And I suppose you can fall down that path very, very quickly.
Yeah. I don't think the stripping industry is as bad as the harder stuff.
Sure.
But it can be a gateway to that.
So you survived through the COVID times, through the sugar daddy relationships.
Yeah.
And how many relationships were there, would you say? Not a precise figure, but are we talking a couple? Are we talking 5 or 6? Are we talking double figures? How many?
Well, there was a lot. Yeah. But there was a main one. I was in a relationship with a guy. He was a drug trafficker. And yeah, he was a lot older than me, and he lavished me with gifts and let me move into his house. So I was supported by that, and I really did love him, but it turned really ugly.
And I suppose 2 questions from that, just general questions, Chantelle. Did you feel morally compromised by being in a relationship with someone who was a criminal?
No, I don't judge criminals. Like, everyone is who they are because of a reason. I mean, he told me he wasn't a criminal anymore, and I believed him because I was young, naive. But yeah, no, I don't think someone's a bad person because they've committed a crime. Some people are just misled. Maybe I'm a bit naive still.
Not at all. It's just interesting because some people, I'm sure, who will watch this podcast will find it difficult to think how you could be in a relationship with a criminal of that magnitude and yet not feel morally compromised. But I can see how you would think differently. That's not a problem at all. That relationship ends badly.
Yeah.
What do you now do?
Well, I'm still involved in the world of like organised crime, and I'm still mixing with them people, flying across the world and stuff. I'm not a trafficker or anything, but just mixing in that world. You know, it's to me it's glamorous at the forefront, but then over time you figure out that world is full of deceit, nasty people. Really dark undertones.
And did you feel worried for your own safety? Because dangerous environments, dangerous people puts you under pressure.
No, I never felt fear. I loved danger.
And would you say you'd have been happy to remain in that lifestyle, or did you feel that something had to change?
Something had to change because I was really unhappy, and I just had this sense that I could do more with my life. Yeah.
And what was the tipping point? When was that moment when you suddenly thought, I've got to change?
Oh, it's hard for me to think about this. I'd come out of a relationship. There was a lot of drugs going on. There was a lot of violence around me and bad people. And I felt like I was at the lowest of the low of society. I thought, in terms of people in society, I was that. And I just thought, what if I just gave myself a chance in life? So, yeah, I flew back to England and I made a game plan for how I was going to sort my life out.
No, that's fantastic, because you're surrounded by what a lot of people would refer to as negative energy. So you appreciate that you now need to ditch the negative energy and you need to be looking upwards towards more positive. So what was that game plan? What did you write down?
I wanted to do music because that's what I always gravitated towards as a kid. So I thought I could do that and it wouldn't feel like work. So I thought, no one's going to listen to my music if I just put a song out. So I'm going to start vlogging my life. And it took a lot for me to grow the bollocks to be like, I'm going to come out as a stripper and vlog that experience behind the scenes in the dressing rooms, the psychology behind being a stripper. But I just said, sod it, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to be authentic about what it's like. And then that started to grow. I'm back dancing in the clubs, right? And then I'm thinking, we could start getting people from across the country to come visit us in the clubs because of these vlogs. So then I start like really taking it serious, and then I'm getting these viral videos on TikTok telling stories from the club. And then I'm building this sort of like social media thing. And it wasn't necessarily the stripping that people bought into. I think it was just like me just being myself about it. Yeah, don't know where I'm going from here.
And the life that you've just left behind, is it easy to leave behind? Because one minute you're flying around the world, being lavished with all these wonderful gifts, money's no object, surrounded by fairly glamorous people, albeit, like you said, from the criminal fraternity.
Yeah.
Is it easy for you to leave that life behind? And secondly, do they allow you to leave that life behind? Because I would imagine that mixing in those circles, then you know certain things. I don't want to know specifics, but you would know certain things. And, you know, there would be a certain element of problem potentially for you just walking away from a situation like that.
Yeah, it was hard to leave that life. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Yeah, there was like court cases and stuff, restraining orders. And psychologically, it was hard to leave. It was hard coming back to normal society and having to function and not knowing what normal is. Yeah.
And that's what I sort of meant earlier about the fast money, because, you know, like I said, if you've actually had to graft very, very hard to get 1,500 quid, but then if someone just hands you 1,500 quid in sort of 10 minutes, you know, for doing a dance, you look upon that £1,500 so very differently, don't you?
Yeah, I suppose you don't really value it, but I invested everything I made into music and therapy. So I was quite... I mean, at first I was well done with money, But I learned that lesson quick, and I believe I put it into the right things.
And we'll now start to talk about the music career, but I'm now just thinking about future relationships, because you said it's difficult to function back into normal society after having been in the world that you're in. I would imagine it's difficult to function in normal relationships after the environment that you've been in, because if a relationship for you has been a sugar daddy relationship where effectively, without wanting to sound crude, you're on the payroll, it must be difficult then to form what we would term as a more loving relationship, general attraction, loving relationship. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. I think, I had to do a lot of work in therapy to unwire my thoughts on relationships, trauma bonds with controlling men. Now I'm in a really healthy relationship with a lovely guy. That was an achievement in itself, just going for someone that isn't a criminal.
And, without wanting to go into the ins and outs of your relationship, did he know your past when you met, or did there come that awkward point where you had to turn around to him and say, there's something I need to tell you?
Yeah, I told him pretty early on, because I do believe in just being honest in a relationship, and you can't grow intimacy with someone without being your complete self. So I told him everything, and he never once judged me. He understood the whole story.
Good bloke. So the music career starts to sort of take off organically through social media, but I suppose initially, like we all are when we start these new projects, we're playing at it. So how does it start to build?
I'm in the strip clubs, I'm writing songs on my notes. And then the first song that I make and release starts getting played on radio stations across the UK, BBC introducing. And then one day I'm in a taxi to work, and I get this email that's like, we're going to play your song on Radio 1. I'm thinking, what the hell? Yeah.
And who sends you that message?
BBC.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get an email.
And obviously that goes out on Radio 1. Presumably you tell lots of people it's going to be played on Radio 1, I would imagine. What sort of feedback do you get from that?
Yeah, really good. Surprisingly, throughout the whole journey, whether it be stripping or the music, I haven't had that much negative trolls, as they say. Yeah.
So music single number 1 comes out, but obviously that's just the start. So how do you push it forward?
Yeah, so that was just the start. I put out 2 more songs after that that were a bag of shit, to be honest.
And what were you just trying to rush them out? Because I know a lot of musical artists, they say something good happens and then they try and go with it, and then suddenly you're just not putting the same time. You're trying to rush it through. You think you've been maybe played on Radio 1. Let's get another one out there. Was that the case?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the issue was I was trying to push the stripper thing. But actually, when I come away from that a year later and I decided, right, do you know what? Let's actually make some good music. Let's stop making things to shock people, to get my body out in music videos. Let's actually, because I'm very interested in all sorts of music. And in the studio, I'm interested in... I'm quite a musical person. So I thought, let's put my artistic side to practice.
So would you say at this stage now, although you're still stripping, you're taking yourself away from it bit by bit, basically? You're using the music to sort of, as leverage to get away from that particular environment. That's your key, that's your tool to get out of that environment.
Yeah, to be honest, the focus is on music now. I just want to be gigging as much as possible, but I don't want to get complacent, like, yeah, that's it, I've made it, do you know what I mean? Because I know it can be taken away at any moment.
And I saw some of your YouTube videos when you were doing the music about strippers and you were getting some of the girls involved and you were going behind the scenes and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
You know, it all looks good fun and games, but was it?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to it. There was a lot of it that was glamorous. I love the process of getting ready for a big night on a Saturday night with your girls, but then there is a dark side to it. It opens the door to like bad boys and seedy people and drugs or whatever. I just think with everything in life, you have your pros and cons. You have the good and you have the light and the dark. And in the moment, I found it all beautiful.
It's like I said, you know, if you think of life as a series of energies, you know, when you're surrounded by low energy, it attracts other low energy, but it takes something to push you away from that low energy, which you've done through the music there. So you're now pushing the music forward.
Yeah.
So tell me where you are at the minute.
Where I'm at the minute is I spent a lot of... Shall I wait until that's gone a bit quiet? Oh, okay. Where I'm at the minute is I've been hibernating and hiding from the world to create a new chapter of music that's a lot more artistic and a lot more authentically me, as opposed to, oh, I'm a stripper. Yeah.
That first single you did, Pint in London,
Yeah.
which I've listened to a couple of times. I mean, it's a very cleverly crafted song, to be fair. You know, it's got elements of all sorts in there. You know, the first time I listened to it, I thought, wow, you know, it's not just something you'd knocked up in 5 minutes. You know, it's very, very, not just professionally done. You know, it's obviously been written with a certain level of craft. Do you look back on that with pride? Or because of the time in which you were actually writing that song, do you look back on it and cringe slightly?
I do cringe a little bit, but I always cringe at my old work. But it's sort of a memoir of where I was at the time.
And would you ever say you have, as people call it, imposter syndrome? Because it's very easy to get that sometimes, you know, whether you're doing a podcast, running a business, making music, you can sometimes think, I'm not really cut out for this. Everybody else is better than me, you know, or you even sometimes can doubt your own abilities. Would you say you've had that with your music?
Yeah, that's been one of the biggest things I've gone through, is not feeling like I'm worthy of where I'm at in music. I think there's always that niggling voice of like, you're just some girl that, I don't know, a bit of a failure or whatever.
So before we start to talk about the future, to sort of finish off, just want to ask you one question. If you could go back and you could change one thing that happened in your life, because you've been through lots of traumatic incidences, and we were discussing before that we're all products of our upbringing, our environment and our experiences, what was the one thing that you would change?
What would I change? I'd have just stuck to music from 16.
Carried on with that college course?
Well, I finished the songwriting course, but I would have, from that point, just gone, boom, music.
So let's finish off by talking about the future. You've got your new release coming out on the 7th of February?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, So the next song that's coming out is a song about fighting through the chaos. It's about that feeling of when you're so emotionally tested that you can't feel emotion anymore. It's a song about taking accountability for your actions. It's called Law 3, which is Newton's third law. Every action has an equal opposite reaction. And it's a triumphant song of battling through.
And very apt.
And very
apt for what you've been through in your life.
Yeah.
And beyond this single, obviously you've got this new release, but you've always got to be looking 2 or 3 steps ahead, you know. What does the rest of 2024 hold for you?
I'd love to perform at some festivals. And I've been writing a lot with my producer, but secret.
Well, I think, you're on the right path now. Arguably, you've always been on the right path, but there's just been some deviations along the way. And you've come a long way from maybe that 12-year-old who was taken into care and spent that first night in a children's home, probably thinking, what on earth does life hold in store for me?
Yeah.
Are you proud of yourself?
Am I proud of myself? I'm not, I don't know, I'm not.
And why are you not?
I think I always look for the next thing. But really, I should just look around me at the minute and see how far I've come.
Absolutely. I think we'll leave it there, Chantelle, because it's been a really interesting podcast. And although you may not be proud of yourself, having heard your story, I'm certainly proud of you. And I think you've come an awful long way. And I think you'll go an awful long way from this point onwards as well, because I think the future's going to look really bright for you. So thanks ever so much for coming in. Appreciate your time. And what we'll do on our social channels, we'll make sure we're promoting your single when it comes out on the 7th of February.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate coming on here. And I just think letting people show the full backstory is really important, and it helps other people be comfortable with the scars that they've got as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chantelle.
Thank you.